Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And each week we invite you to send in your questions and we'll explore the stories of the city of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. This week, we are connecting to a significant moment in Heritage Mississauga, and that is the release of our latest comic book endeavor, and this is the Grange volume number 11 called Legend of the North Star. And joining us this week is Justine Lyn, who was the person most responsible for the story and the research behind the comic itself, and freelance artist Daniel Wong, who right from day one, and when was day one? 2013, I think. Right from day one has brought our stories to life in this incredible and ongoing series of the Grange comic books. We have now done 11 and 12 on the horizon and so on and so on. But again, thank you, Justine and Daniel. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Well, it's a fascinating journey to bring a comic to life. And Daniel, I know you and I have worked on these over many years before we had as much gray hair as we do. It's a joy. Oh, Justine, you'll get there.
Starting.
It's an amazing journey to go on for myself from say taking a factual storyline or a factual idea from local history and then interpreting it and crafting it into the creative artwork that you do, Daniel. And so I want to explore this journey, not only just from the artwork perspective, but how we craft a story. And so, Justine, this was kind of your baby right from the get-go in terms of the research behind it, but and creating kind of a story idea. So just what's the inspiration of the story? How did we come up with the story? You don't have to tell me. I know I was part of the process in part, but explain kind of the genesis of the story creation.
Yeah, so we want to touch on some of the early Black settlers in Mississauga. So really that was just looking through old census records and, seeing who was listed as living in Mississauga at that time. And so we came across the Thomas family, among other families, I would say. But we came across the Thomas family, and then it was just a lot of research trying to see if we could find anything about them. And to be honest, I don't really think I should take most of the credit for it, because I was really stumped, to be honest with you. And until I connected with one of the descendants, and she's kind of the family genealogist in her family, and so she had done a lot of research and about the background of the family and the story and what happened after we see them on the 1851 census. And so that is John and Catherine Thomas and their children Mary and George, who are living here in 1851. And so what happens, what happened to them before, what happened to them after? This is really just a snapshot into their life at that time. And so that was kind of the inspiration behind it, I guess, is what things would have, perhaps mattered to them, what would have been things that would have made them, anxious, or, what was their motivations in life at that time. And of course, I can't necessarily know that. So it's a lot of kind of, guesstimating and talking to the family and seeing what they would know of their own ancestors. But this was basically the inspiration behind it, and also looking at the things that were happening in the abolitionist movement at the time as well. We have the Anti-Slavery Society that's formed in 1851. And so, so what was happening at that time, basically. Yeah, so those kind of things were very much the inspiration, and reading lots of old newspapers and stuff like that. And yeah, it was an interesting experience, to be honest. Yeah.
And so, I mean, really, then you're taking the story of what little we know of them actually, but piecing it together in terms of the family tree, but also the contextual history of the time, of what's happening around them, and crafting them in the story of the times in which they lived. And so a part factual, part knowledge that we've gleaned on the family, but also part of just kind of placing them in the context of their times, right? Like, so there's
all these things that are happening. There's all these things that are happening. In 1850, we have the Fugitive Slave Act that's passed in America. And so, if you're a freedom seeker, really in any of the states in America, you're no longer safe. And so we see a huge migration of people into Canada. In hindsight, we know that the slave catching parties didn't necessarily go into Canada, or at least not commonly. But at the time, they didn't necessarily know that. And so I could imagine that there would just be a lot of anxiety and wondering if you're really free. And so there's all these really big things that are historically happening. And then, trying to contextualize that with the family and with, how would this one particular family have felt in that time, is basically things that I was trying to focus on.
I think it was a wonderful journey to go on. So Daniel, you have this a treatise on a local family historically, and we throw it to you and say, hey, create something from this. How is it that you go from an expanded story to creating a storyline, storyboards, the crafting process? Can you describe to us kind of that process that you go through when we hand you a bunch of words?
Sure. In this case, Justine already came with a very good breakdown of the story, meaning she already had an idea of what would be on each page. And if that were absent, that would be my first step, is take the general outline and break it down into, this is going to happen in page 1, and this is going to happen in page 12. And then pick out the key moments in the story and then place them into pages, basically break it down into pages. And then from there, you can break down each page into panels. That's the general basis of it. But there's a lot more going on behind the scenes as well. In particular, with the Grange series, we're dealing with historical characters. Oftentimes, you provide photos. Like in this case, we actually had photos of the characters that are in the story. So there's an amount of time spent, sketching out the characters to get their likeness. You kind of have to, because we're only working from one photo. Because I'm working from one photo, it's often difficult to grasp the facial features. So there's the more pictures there are, the easier it can be. Sometimes in the past, we don't know what they look like, and so we use other historical photos to kind of mesh things together. Particularly clothing or hairstyles, that kind of thing, and oftentimes a lot of the photos are black and white. So we have to, we have to make some assumptions on skin tones and that kind of thing, or even the color of their clothing.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of that aspect. That starts even before the layouts of how to break down the pages happen. Yeah.
So can you, I'm not an artist. I can't draw to save my life. I've seen you sketch far better than I could possibly ever draw, never mind your final.
Right.
How do you, as an artist, what is the process that you go through to create the artwork that is within the comic? Because truly every page, every image within this comic, we look at it as a comic, but it's a piece of art individually to itself. How is your process for creating art for the story?
You touched on a good point, because a comic book, basically each panel is its own piece of artwork. Now, but the interesting thing about comics as a visual medium is that you have to tell a story. So they're not just individual pieces of artwork. right? Yeah. So one major consideration is you have to link all the panels together and actually guide the reader through that process, so they're not reading panels out of order or even text bubbles out of order. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes to kind of make that flow together. And when you do it right, the reader doesn't even notice that you've done this for them. A lot of times it's hard to describe because it's a creative process.
Right.
So I can't say, oh, this is exactly how it's done. But there are key things that need to happen. For example, if you look at this book or any of the other books, you'll see a variety of different types of panels. And basically, you have to establish where this page or this particular scene is taking place. So you have to establish a place. And and with this comic, we, like right on the first page, we see Mississauga City Center. Mm-hmm. And not just places where these characters are. And then it gives the reader a sense of place so that they can anchor themselves in, and then put themselves into the story. Basically, like any medium, you want to draw the audience into the space that you're creating for them.
Right.
Then the other parts have to do with guiding a choice of panels to guide the reader's eye from panel to panel. And then the last part is there's usually something of a close-up, because close-ups conveys emotion, conveys feelings, and then that marries together with the dialogue. So those are kind of the framework that I go with. And then when I try to hit those targets, and in particular on each page, I also try to target what is the key point being made, and then use that as the jumping point. And usually those are the panels I focus on doing first, and then I build the rest of the page. So it's a bit of a voodoo art, but those are the guidelines.
Yeah, I remember in our discussions over the past two, you talk about the kind of the journey that you take the reader on in terms of these moments of angst within a storyline to kind of win. Yeah. How do you? I mean, that's got to be, I guess, regular business for you in terms of the crafting, but sometimes difficult from the historical narrative to kind of craft that story in. Can you talk about the kind of the hook, how you hook them into the story? You already did the character by placing them into it.
Right. A lot of times it's instinctive, right? When I read an outline, I go, well, this is, there's an opportunity here. Like maybe that's a little too, I don't want to use the word boring, but
I was going to say, you can use that if you like.
Okay. it's just too commonplace, right? Because the idea of a story that somebody wants to read is that they want to be drawn into something more fantastical than the everyday, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, with this particular type of comic, you want to bring in the everyday at the same time so that they can connect to it.
Right.
And so that's sometimes it's very just instinctive. I don't know how to describe how that's done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Basically,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to say that, I mean, I think it's really important because for us, when we're writing it down, we're just writing it down, right? And so like we don't necessarily have the artistic vision of that. Yeah. And so like I think one of the most amazing and interesting things is seeing it for the very first time, just in sketches, mm-hmm. you know, and seeing how that has then translated to it. And so, I mean, I think that there's a certain, you know, spark or something mm-hmm. like this, where it's not even necessarily learned, like you're saying, it's an instinct that you have. And you know what I mean? Like, so I think, you know, it's a great power that you have that you bring to the project.
And sometimes that instinct, I don't want to make it sound like this magical, It has to do a lot of times with just sketching the first image. And then when that first image goes down and you try to piece together, like using what I described before, like you have to lead the eye from panel to panel, it kind of just naturally pops out. And it says, we can do this and we cannot do this, right? Sometimes what's written cannot be done within that framework. And so that's where the instinct kicks in and go, yeah, that might work and that won't work. Maybe we can replace it with something else that's similar.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of organic. It just happens naturally for each page, each panel.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, what I think I find one of the more amazing aspects of what we do, and I'm not sure that a regular someone who picks up a comic book really can grasp kind of the background work into it, but you know, basically from a storyline, Justine's done it, and I've done it many times before. We create a mini essay, you know, a story outline with a great deal of research, a great deal of story, but that gets condensed into the text bubbles throughout. You see throughout the comic,
Yeah.
right? And the imagery that you show as well. And
Right,
so,
right.
like I know within our research, Justine, we had, you know, we connected onto a number of larger topics that are certainly connect to a broader story. And we insert them, and we've done this before, Daniel, but we insert these things that we reference but don't explore as Easter eggs, or I think that was the term that's used. I don't know, that's a vernacular that I've got, but these hidden things that you invite people to explore a wider topic. And I know you depicted some, and we talk about some in some of the text, but Justine, can you highlight a couple of those things that are kind of like hidden within plain sight in the comic that invite kind of introspection into a larger story?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've already touched on the Anti-Slavery Society, and they used to meet at St. Lawrence Hall, and it's quite interesting because you know the reports that they have, like they are you know, public, you can find them, and you know, and just looking at the people who are there, right? And so we can place who is there. And you know, someone that stood out for me, for example, was Reverend Robert Orr of Streetsville. And so he's basically like director, member of the Anti-Slavery Society. And you know, and so he's like a very interesting person. Like, oh wow, like I didn't know that, right? And there's representatives from really all over Ontario, over Canada, and as well, another one of the people that we focus on a lot, who was once again there as well, was Henry Bibb. And he was the founder and editor of The Voice of the Fugitive, which we discuss in the comic. And in it, I'm reading through this in March of 1852, there's a letter from Reverend Samuel Ringwald Ward, and he travels through bunch of different places, including historic Mississauga, and he writes about it. And Bibb actually publishes this in his newspaper, and you know, and he talks about the farmlands and about how, you know, much work has to be done in terms of anti-slavery, you know, and like the work about you know, discrimination and things like this, even in Canada, basically. And these were, you know, people that would have known each other and stuff. You know, and apparently I was actually reading that Reverend Ward was a bit of a rival of Henry Bibb. Not sure if that's true or not, but kind of interesting that, you know, these people very much knew each other and interacted with each other. And Reverend Ward, he and his family escaped slavery when he was very young, and he actually helped other people escape slavery until it was no longer safe for him to do so, and he had to basically come to Canada. But he continued to go back and lecture in the US, in Canada, and even in the UK, garnering support for the abolitionist movement. And he was known as this really eloquent speaker and stuff. and and Bibb also did a lot of other stuff as well, including the Refugee Home Society, helping to settle refugees, freedom seekers when they came into Canada. So, there's a lot of things that we kind of, you can explore at much, further lengths. But yeah, there was a lot of really interesting characters that we really wanted to highlight, even if it is only in, like a couple of panels, right? But yeah, so it's pretty interesting.
And maybe we can use this as a segue, though, just really quickly, because we don't want to give it away. And there are unknowns in our story, too. But there are other people we've connected to the Thomases and kind of the stories and time that which they lived in. But there are other people that we've connected with historically, too, that perhaps can, Daniel, maybe this is the kind of the future as we look forward, but other stories we can tell that we're exploring. And can you really quickly, Justine, just talk about maybe some of those other things that we could connect to potentially with local families, and we invite people to help us too in that process.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is the Thomas family. They are living beside another neighbor, the Lywicks, who are also listed as being Black at that time, but they're actually from the UK. So that's also really interesting. And we haven't really been able to fully flesh that out. So like that's another story that, very interesting. I feel like there's definitely a story there. The other one that I personally found was really interesting, and I've spoken to this a little bit at other times, but is the Spencer family in the 1861 census, so a bit later. And and their 8-year-old son is listed as a laborer, and so what's the story behind that? And I haven't really been able to find whatever happened to him, the son, like what happened with him. Found a little bit about some of the other children, not much about the parents, and John Spencer Jr., the boy. But so there's a lot of these different things I think we could definitely explore in the future, and it's a continuing project. It feels like it's never ending, but it's great because we're just learning so much as we're going. So yeah,
and Daniel's never allowed to leave because we have to keep this going. That's the one of the most iconic things I think of all the series we do, Daniel, and you do such an incredible job on it, but is the front cover artwork of it. We usually depict our characters in kind of a superhero-esque type of pose or costume, but whenever I hand them out, I'm like, it's not about superheroes. Like
right.
How do you craft the covers? And I'm thinking like all of our covers are so amazing, but like how do you come up with these the ideas to depict them? And I know there's conversation that goes back and forth, but we've gone with kind of these superhero covers. Just wondering if you can talk to us about how cover art and what it's meant to do.
Well, right from the get-go, when we first did our first book, The Avro Arrow, when we were first discussing how are we gonna create a comic book with historical content, and we thought, well, comic books traditionally, at least in North America, dealt with superheroes. And so that was kind of how I mean, if you recall way back then, it's basically a hook to get someone interested, to basically pick up the book even.
Yeah.
Right. If we just depict people just standing there, historical figures, well, most kids or even adults are gonna go, well, it's not that, it doesn't look that interesting. So it's basically, covers are meant to, especially in the comic book industry, it's meant to draw you in, to make you want to pick it up. And then the hope is that once you pick it up and you start reading it, the content itself will take over and draw you in.
Right.
So some people don't like the misleading nature of covers where you depict something on the cover but it doesn't appear inside the book. But that is the goal, I guess.
But in order to find that out, they have to pick it up.
They have to pick it up, exactly. Right. It's not any different than like a movie trailer, right?
Right.
A lot of times movie trailers don't really represent the movie itself, right? They just show you the exciting aspects.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what I'm amazed about, and I reflect back on however many years we've been doing this, and
Yes.
you know, I came into this world not really understanding the process, but more importantly, the depth of thought that goes into it in terms of all the elements that you talk about, and Justine can talk about this too now. You know, like it really is a comprehensive story that we're telling in a visual medium, and there are so many layers of process, countless hours. I mean, we never even counted our hours, but I know we had hours and hours and hours of work into the storyline, and then you've got umpteenth hours into the production of this. So it's not something we take lightly, nor is it something that we can just kind of put out there like we're, you know, quickly.
And like I said before, when it's done right, you don't notice. Right. That's the goal. That's the goal. You don't notice how much work has been put into it. You do notice when the work isn't put into it, and you read it and you go, there's something weird about this, or it doesn't connect. Right.
I always said I'm proud of every single one we've done, but if I ever could do it again, I'd do number one over again.
We could. Number one, part two.
Number one, I don't feel like I was up to the task. I wasn't quite sure what was
you know, we could do a reboot.
There we go. We'll bring back the arrow. So on that, I think one of the things is, first of all, we'll encourage everyone to pick up a copy, whether it's a paper copy you can pick them up at our office at the Grange, or a virtual copy. We'll have a digital copy online through our website. But check out the Grange Volume 11, Legend of the North Star. It is released on March 24th of 2022, and which coincidentally is also the date of the anniversary of the meeting of the Anti-Slavery Society of Upper Canada, which met at St. Lawrence Hall on March 24th of 1852, which is when our comic is set. So, you know, it's a marvelous journey to go on. So thank you, Justine, for taking us on that journey from the historical research perspective, and Daniel for bringing it to life. You know, wonderful way to explore and connect with our local history. Look forward to truly sharing the stories with our audience. And thank you both for the tremendous work and talent you've brought to it. So with that, thank you for joining us here on Ask a Historian, Daniel and Justine.
No problem.
So with that, thank you for spending some time with us here at Ask a Historian, and make sure you send in your questions each and every week, and we'll explore the stories of the city of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us here at Heritage Mississauga to stay up to date on all the heritage happenings within the city of Mississauga. So with that, we will see you next week on Ask a Historian.